Whitehall, the heart of government. But could you balance the needs of patients with those of doctors, nurses and surgeons and still be responsible for one of the largest employers in the world? So, you want to be Health Secretary.
You know, you do some things at the start that you probably wouldn't do at the end, and you definitely do some things at the end that you definitely wouldn't do at the start.
In the Conservative Party there's lots of people who know about defence and foreign affairs. It turned out there were really relatively few who knew about health.
The BMA had posters of me all over the country, sort of attacking me, and when I went on holiday, nurses had wanted posters for me at the airports, asking people to search for the missing minister.
The BMA had a great guy who was their lead negotiator. I called him Scargill with a stethoscope. He was brilliant.
I think I'm the first, probably the only person ever who went into the Department of Health and had a World Health pandemic declared within 4 days of arriving in the department.
Jill Rotter is a former civil servant, now with the Institute for Government, who sees that whichever party is in charge, the issues of running the Department of Health are much the same.
The thing to remember about being Secretary of State for Health is you have this giant budget, second biggest budget in government, you have a small department, but you're basically accountable for this really giant organisation called the National Health Service, but you don't run it. So that is the key relationship you have to get right. The second thing is that you are dealing with doctors and nurses, effectively some of the most effective trade unions in the country. They have very high credibility. You're a politician, you have very low credibility. How are you going to deal with them?
Just expect all hell let loose. The public and the political class and the media get more worked up about health issues than anything else. Any Secretary of State finds that he or she is embroiled in constant battle with one group or another. It requires a great deal of reform and change to keep up with changing demands and so on. Every time you want to change something, it is fought bitterly by some interest group or other. And the people who are most resistant to change are the general public, who want a better health service but don't want it varied in any way from that with which they're familiar.
And the fact is, that process of change never seems to end.
The National Health Service is like continually digging a hole under yourself, and you have to continually move forward. It's one of the great challenges that the success of the NHS presents it with a never greater challenge.
And there's always been a price to pay for the Health Secretary. So much so, one of them didn't much like the look of the job.
I had done health in opposition. I had opposed Barbara Castle. We had a very hairy time. She was having the hairy time. I was in opposition, but she was having a difficult time, again with the BMA and the consultants and all the medical establishment, and had to be rescued, much to her complete horror, by Lord Goodman. And you saw then, this was a Labour Secretary of State, you saw then how difficult it was to make progress.
You know, one of the reasons why in the health service there have been so many reform programmes is because most of them people have been hit hard and pulled back, and they've been half-baked. You know, the table is littered with half-baked reforms. The point was to try and accomplish the baking of the whole thing.
The opposition to such reforms has come most often over the controversial issue of who else, apart from the NHS, can provide services.
You know, my goodness, Dave Prentice and I used to have these ding-dong arguments, you know, with officials and special advisors sitting there wincing away as we went hammer and tongs about some issue. Because, you know, he didn't believe in alternative providers in the NHS, and I did, and, you know, we weren't going to reach agreement on that.
You've got a situation in our country, and it will always probably be like this, where 90 to 95% of care is provided by the public sector. That's pretty unusual. But if you can bring in some private sector players who've got expertise, knowledge, capacity and capability to treat NHS patients for free, according to NHS principles, need not ability to pay, why on earth wouldn't you do that?
For Andrew Lansley, those who argued you shouldn't were NHS managers themselves.
They had been opposed to it when Alan Milburn brought it in, when Patricia Hewitt legislated for it. They were opposed to it then. They continued, and they probably are opposed to it to this day.
But there are many politicians and people who sing the same tune, and they're not shy about telling you.
If your colleagues in the House, other MPs, are concerned about health in their patch, they'll get you. And it's no good saying to them, oh, go and see the guy from NHS England. They expect you to sort it out. I remember a woman once coming to my surgery asking me if I could write to the health secretary on her behalf. I was the health secretary. She didn't realise. I said, yeah, of course. I should be able to do that in the next couple of days.
For one Secretary of State, the department was more than just treating the sick.
Day one, Department of Health, I said to the massed ranks of the senior people in the Department of Health, from now on, physical activity is going to be the core business of this department. And I think it's fair to say a tumbleweed went across the table because they were thinking, no, that's DCMS. And I knew the Department of Health culture was, oh yeah, we like buying pills and syringes and scalpels and aprons, but we don't invest in running machines or because that's the DH kind of culture. Actually, it's a kind of we'll pick up the pieces when you're ill. It truly isn't, to be fair, a department of health, promoting health.
Perhaps the largest reform of the NHS and most controversial was brought in 2010, and many people said it had been sprung on the NHS, breaking a promise.
Somebody, and I have not to this day yet found somebody who will own up to it, put into the coalition programme a reference to no more top-down reorganisation on the basis that the Prime Minister had said it in 2006, therefore it must be true in 2010. Well, in between we had the manifesto. It wasn't in the Conservative manifesto. Those words didn't appear. They didn't appear in the Liberal Democrat manifesto. Somebody decided they should be in the coalition programme, notwithstanding that they were in neither of the two parties' manifestos. That in itself, in that simple fact, which has nothing to do with me, happened in somewhere in the bowels of the Cabinet Office, that in itself was very damaging.
As today's Health Secretary, junior doctors and patients know right now the job of providing health in this country is not easy at the front line, and it doesn't seem that easy in the corridors of Whitehall.